Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez delivers a bold defense of immigrant rights, only to have her words distorted and broadcast by a major network just 3 hours later. As outrage explodes nationwide, she's left isolated, losing over 250,000 followers overnight, while her allies go silent. But one person doesn't: Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. With just 72 hours and one silver USB drive, Jasmine risks everything to expose the conspiracy in front of the world. How do you fight back when the lie goes viral before the truth even gets heard? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. The hearing room pulsed with controlled tension. Dozens of congressional staffers stood rigid along the walls, hands behind backs, faces unreadable. Cameras perched like silent vultures atop tripods, their red lights blinking steadily. Watching, recording, waiting. At the center, beneath the seal of the United States Congress, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez sat motionless, eyes locked forward, breath steady as steel. The topic was dry on paper: labor rights and immigration enforcement procedures. But everyone in the room knew what it really was: a trap disguised as formality, a stage built to provoke, discredit, and dismantle her. One slip, one wrong word, and they'd bury her in headlines before sunset. The chairman cleared his throat. "Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez, you have 5 minutes." She didn't thank him. She didn't smile. She simply leaned into the microphone and said, in a tone that was almost too calm, "We cannot continue to criminalize hunger." Her voice sliced through the room like a wire through glass. "We cannot criminalize poverty," she continued, each syllable sharpened by restraint. "And we sure as hell cannot criminalize the human instinct to survive." Time itself seemed to pause. Phones stopped clicking. The rustle of notepads ceased. For a split second, no one moved, not even to breathe. The gravity of those words wasn't in their volume, but in their weight. She wasn't pleading. She was indicting, condemning an entire apparatus of policy that punished desperation as if it were a crime. On the far right side of the chamber, a congressman shifted uncomfortably, his face twitching as though the words had physically struck him. Near the back, Jasmine Crockett leaned forward slowly, eyes narrowed, the corners of her lips drawn in tight control. No theatrics, no fanfare. Just an acknowledgement, subtle but seismic, that AOC had just fired the first shot in a war no one else dared to name. In that instant, everything changed. AOC had drawn a line that wasn't rhetorical. It was moral. She had just named what the room was built to hide: that in America, survival itself had become a legal liability. Her voice didn't tremble. It didn't rise. It just stayed deadly even, like a calm tide pulling bodies out to sea. It wasn't a statement. It was an act of rebellion against sanitized cruelty. And Jasmine saw it all, saw how those few sentences had disarmed an entire ideological machine. The camera lenses zoomed in like snipers. Journalists froze, unsure whether to write or just listen. A chill passed through the chamber, not from fear but from exposure. The system had been spoken to, not with anger, but with unwavering clarity. And in that frozen silence, Jasmine Crockett knew. History had just been given its opening line. The applause never came, but it didn't have to. AOC's words had already detonated beneath the surface of Washington. But while the room held its breath, far beyond those marble walls, something darker had already begun to move. Silent, swift, and sharpened like a blade. At exactly 7:03 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, the screen on National Broadcast America faded to black, then flashed red. Breaking: AOC defends immigrant crime. The anchor appeared center frame, tie crisp, expression calibrated to signal danger. "Tonight," he intoned, "a sitting member of Congress makes a statement that may shock you." The footage rolled, clipped, cold, and surgically severed from truth. Gone were the words about hunger, about poverty, about survival. All that remained was a single manufactured line: "We cannot criminalize immigrant crime." It was not a mistake. It was a message, weaponized and reassembled like a political ID. The screen cut back to the anchor, who leaned closer and asked, "Is this what leadership looks like in America now?" By 7:11 p.m., the story had metastasized. Dozens of media sites reposted the clip with headlines that bled outrage. AOC defends lawbreakers? Congresswoman or cartel apologist? A still image of her mid-sentence, eyes intense, mouth slightly open, circulated with captions designed to destroy. In private chat rooms and campaign war rooms, operatives shared social media assets like ammo, screen caps, quotes, bolded text banners. The coordination wasn't accidental. It was orchestrated. This was no organic outrage. It was a hit job wearing the mask of journalism. By nightfall, 3 cable networks had aired full-hour panels discussing the threat of radical rhetoric, all using the same falsified clip as evidence. In the span of a single hour, AOC's words had been hijacked, twisted, and unleashed back at her like a storm of blades. Her phone lit up with alerts, some from colleagues, others from strangers. The messages were cold and brutal. You went too far. They're going to make you pay for this. Maybe lay low for a while. Beneath news articles, comments poured in like bile from a broken dam. Some were mockery, some were threats. Many simply called her unfit to serve. Not one of them had heard what she actually said, but none of that mattered. In a media ecosystem designed to devour context and vomit outrage, AOC had just been served up as the night's main course. The truth sat quietly on her screen, unplayed and unwanted, while outside the lie she never told was marching through America like a verdict with no trial. By the end of the 12th hour, the sky above New York was steel gray, bruised by dawn, but the storm breaking across the country wasn't made of clouds. It was made of headlines. On cable news, her voice had become a bludgeon. Her face was plastered onto every screen, frozen mid-sentence. Eyes fierce, expression carved into something almost militant. They had taken her words, hollowed them out like a carcass, and stuffed them with meanings she never intended. Conservative pundits didn't waste time dissecting her logic. They went for blood. AOC, soft on crime, soft on borders, and soft on reality, one Fox News commentator spat. The screen behind him lit up with fire-colored graphics and statistics that had nothing to do with her. She's not un-American, he added, smirking. She's anti-American. In just 12 hours, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez had gone from symbol to spectacle. Her name was no longer being spoken. It was being spat. A carefully rehearsed media apparatus revved to life like a machine built for one purpose: humiliation without due process. Editorials were drafted with frightening speed, as if they'd been pre-written and simply waiting for the right moment to deploy. The Daily Republic ran a lead article titled, "When Empathy Becomes Treason," framing her as the mouthpiece of an insurgent ideology. Her words, chopped, rearranged, emptied of context, appeared in giant block letters across op-ed banners, with commentary like delusional, reckless, and dangerously naive, peppered underneath like bullets on a firing range. It wasn't journalism, it was demolition. But what pierced deepest wasn't the malice of her enemies. It was the silence of her supposed allies. Offices that once quoted her in campaign ads now fell eerily quiet. The same representatives who praised her for speaking uncomfortable truths were suddenly unavailable for comment. Press aides issued vague statements about respecting all perspectives. A senior member of her own party appeared on a morning show and, when asked to comment, offered only a shrug and the phrase, "Words matter. I hope she clarifies soon." AOC watched it in real time, the words hitting her harder than any insult. Not because they were brutal, because they were hollow. She had stepped onto the battlefield expecting fire from the front. What she didn't expect was retreat from behind. By midday, the numbers began to drop. Not poll numbers, not approval ratings, but people. Hundreds of thousands. Followers disappeared like a tide pulling away from shore. Not just trolls or opposition bots. Verified supporters, college activists, healthcare organizers, teachers who used to quote her in classrooms. The digital exodus was quiet but deafening. Her notification feed, usually a cacophony of praise, was now filled with scorn, sarcasm, and betrayal. One message read, "I believed in you. You let me down." Another, "We fought for you, and you gave ammo to the other side." Some simply said, "Unfollowed." It wasn't just the bleeding of support. It was the sense that no one wanted to hear her speak. Truth had become irrelevant. The moment had been hijacked, and she was now a symbol of something she never said. A Rorschach test in a broken mirror. She could have posted the full video. She could have issued a statement, but she knew what would follow. They'd call it damage control. They'd call it backpedaling. They'd say she was hiding behind context, and context in modern warfare is the first casualty. Inside her apartment, the air was heavy, still, like the moment before glass breaks. The sun cut through the blinds in pale slivers, casting shadows across her laptop, which sat open but untouched. The cursor blinked in the corner of the screen, like a silent metronome measuring tension. On the desktop, a folder marked Hearing Raw Master Feed glowed softly. The real video, the real sentence. But it felt distant now, like evidence left behind at a crime scene no one intended to solve. Her phone buzzed again. Press inquiries, requests for comment, a few private messages from former colleagues carefully expressing solidarity, though none of them dared post it publicly. She scrolled briefly. A DM from a young girl read, "They're wrong about you. Please don't give up." Another from a well-known activist simply said, "It's open season. Stay alive." She put the phone down, then picked it up again, then stared at the screen. She knew she had two choices: speak into a hurricane and be accused of fueling it, or say nothing and watch herself disappear into silence. There was no safe path. There was no rescue party. It was her and the storm. Her fingers hovered over the screen. She tapped the Twitter app. The feed opened. Still images of her face, misquotes, calls for censure, think pieces questioning her judgment. She scrolled slowly, absorbing every blow. Then she opened the composer window. No hashtags, no clarifications. Just one sentence. Truth can protect itself. I'm not sure I can. She hit send. No press release, no fanfare, no spin. Just the quiet click of her thumb and the sudden roar of thousands of voices waiting to consume it. Then she placed the phone face down on the table. Outside her window, traffic moved like nothing had changed. But inside that room, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez sat still, gripping the arms of the chair, jaw tight, heart pounding in a rhythm she couldn't control. She wasn't afraid of being wrong. She was afraid of being erased. And for the first time since she'd taken her oath, she realized something horrifying. Sometimes the truth isn't silenced. It's replaced. She had told the truth, but the world didn't want it. And just when it felt like no one would stand up for her, the phone rang, cutting through the silence like a lifeline. At 2:04 in the morning, her phone lit up in the darkness. AOC glanced at the screen. "Jasmine Crockett." She answered without thinking. Jasmine's voice came through, calm but burning with urgency. "I watched the full hearing," she said, skipping any greeting. "I know exactly what you said. That was not what they aired, and I'm not going to let this stand." There was a pause, heavy and certain. Then Jasmine said, "Give me 72 hours. I will find the truth, and when I do, I'll make sure the whole country sees it." AOC closed her eyes. No reply. Just silence. But inside that silence, something shifted. She wasn't alone anymore. Within 30 minutes, Jasmine was back at the Capitol. The building was nearly empty, dark and quiet, but she walked with purpose, straight to the private room where hearing videos were stored. She logged into the system and searched for the full video from AOC's session earlier that week. It should have been easy to find. Every hearing was automatically recorded and saved. But when Jasmine opened the folder marked for that day's footage, something was missing. The only video available was the short, edited version, just a few seconds long, the exact one that had caused the outrage. The rest of it, the full speech, was nowhere in sight. Jasmine frowned and searched again. Still nothing. Then she noticed something strange. The original, longer version had been moved, hidden. Whoever did it made sure only the edited version was public. Someone had gone in, taken the real video, and replaced it with the one that twisted AOC's words. Jasmine knew immediately. This wasn't an accident. It was done on purpose. Someone had wanted this version, the fake version, to be the only thing people saw. She kept digging. After checking a few more folders, Jasmine finally found what she was looking for. The real recording, the full, uncut version of AOC's hearing. It hadn't been deleted, but it had been buried, tucked away in a part of the system that most people didn't even know how to access. Jasmine stared at the file name for a moment, then quietly said to herself, they tried to bury it, but they didn't bury it deep enough. She clicked on it. The full video began playing. AOC's real voice, calm and clear, exactly as it had been that day. The full sentence, the full truth. Jasmine didn't need to hear more. She knew it was all there. No edits, no lies, just facts. She copied the file onto a secure flash drive, pulled it from the computer, and slipped it into her jacket pocket. As she stood there alone in the room, surrounded by silence, Jasmine knew exactly what she was going to do next. In 72 hours, she would bring this lie crashing down. And this time, the cameras would be forced to show the whole truth. Jasmine had found the full video, but the question that now pulled at her gut was colder and far more dangerous. Who wanted it gone, and why so quickly? She dug deeper into the system, not to find the truth. That part was already in her pocket, but to uncover the people who had tried to bury it. Within minutes, her screen filled with lines of hidden activity. One detail jumped out immediately. The video's original name, the full-length recording of AOC's hearing, had been changed manually by someone inside the system. Not automatically, not by routine. Someone had opened the file, typed in a new name by hand, and moved it to a hidden location. Even stranger, the time that showed when this was done didn't match the actual schedule of the hearing. It had been altered before the hearing had ended. That meant they weren't reacting to what AOC said. They were preparing for it, before she even finished speaking. As Jasmine kept searching, she found something else. A message buried among boring system notifications. It was short, no title, no greeting, just one line. Send to Network X. Edit AOC segment by 7 p.m. sharp. She froze. That name, Network X, wasn't a news network or a government department. It was a private company that made videos for outside clients, including political campaigns. It had no reason to be involved in congressional video footage, not unless someone had hired them to do exactly what they'd done, slice AOC's words into a weapon. Jasmine took a long breath, then kept going. She traced where the message had come from. It led her to an office in Dallas. That by itself wasn't unusual, until she looked up the building address. It belonged to a firm known for running attack ads against progressive politicians. The same firm connected to a wealthy group of donors who had publicly vowed to neutralize voices like AOC's. Then she found it. The final piece. One more message sent just before the edited video went viral. It wasn't professional, it wasn't careful, it was blunt. The subject line read, "Monday, we take her down." The message itself was even more brutal. Cut the human survival line completely. Change the message. Hand it off to the media team for full rollout. Jasmine leaned back in her chair, staring at the words. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a plan. Someone had made the decision to change what AOC said, to remove the most powerful part of her speech, and then rush the new version to the public before anyone could ask questions. Not because it was wrong, but because it was too real, too honest, too dangerous to their agenda. She didn't speak. She didn't move. But inside, something hardened. She had seen lies before, but never this deliberate, never this cruel. They hadn't just twisted the truth. They designed the lie in advance and set the trap before the first camera had even started rolling. They had twisted her words into a weapon and used it to strike fear into the nation. But now, with the truth clenched tightly in her hand, Jasmine Crockett wasn't coming to argue. She was coming to expose. The chamber was packed, humming with the quiet dread of anticipation. Lights above burned hotter than usual, and the weight of silence made every creak of leather, every shuffle of paper feel like thunder. Lining the front rows were press crews, journalists, and aides, all armed with notepads, microphones, and prepared headlines. Behind the curved desk sat a panel of lawmakers, eyes half-lidded, expressions unreadable. The hearing was titled Ethics in Media and Congressional Information. Sterile words that masked the true storm beneath. Everyone in the room knew why they were here. Everyone knew the name hanging in the air like a loaded question. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Jasmine Crockett rose from her seat and stepped forward with slow, deliberate control. Her heels struck the marble floor in clean, unforgiving rhythm. She carried no papers, no folders, no written statement, just a single object gripped firmly in her hand, a slim, silver flash drive. It gleamed beneath the lights like a blade. She approached the lectern, turned to the chairman and said plainly, "Mr. Chair, I request 3 minutes." Her voice didn't tremble. It didn't ask. It declared. The chairman glanced up, confused by the brevity, but nodded. "Proceed." Without ceremony, Jasmine stepped to the presentation console at the front of the chamber and inserted the drive. The screen behind her flickered to life. "What you are about to see," she said, turning slightly to address the room, "is not opinion. It is not edited. It is not spin. It is the truth, and the lie it was turned into." The screen split into 2 frames, left and right. The air in the room sharpened. People leaned forward. Some instinctively hit record on their phones. On the left, the original footage began to play. AOC at the hearing, standing tall, voice composed but burning with conviction. "We cannot criminalize hunger. We cannot criminalize poverty. And we sure as hell cannot criminalize the human instinct to survive." On the right, the version shown across every major network. "We cannot criminalize immigrant crime." The cut was jarring, brutal, intentional. The room reacted in waves, first confusion, then quiet horror, then audible gasps from several staffers near the back. Jasmine didn't flinch. She let the full moment hang there. Let them see it with their own eyes. Let them feel the violence of what had been done, not with fists, but with edits, not with noise, but with silence. She pressed pause. The 2 frozen frames sat side by side. AOC's real self and the fiction they'd built to destroy her. Jasmine turned to the audience slowly, eyes scanning the room like a prosecutor preparing her final blow. "This isn't journalism," she said. "This is erasure. This is what happens when a system built to inform decides instead to manipulate. What you saw on the right wasn't a mistake. It was engineered. Someone decided that truth was too dangerous, and so they carved it out and replaced it with fear." She took a step closer to the microphone, voice tightening, tone now razor sharp. "And let's be clear, the real crime here isn't in what was said, but in what was stolen. A message of dignity turned into a weapon of division, a public servant's voice, silenced not with censorship, but with corruption." She paused, letting that sink in, letting the reality hang above them like a gavel that hadn't yet dropped. "So I'll ask each of you, and every camera watching, which version of that woman are you going to remember? The one who spoke the truth? Or the one they built to make you hate her?" The chamber remained frozen. No breath dared break the moment. For a single instant, no one in that room could pretend they hadn't seen what they'd seen. Jasmine didn't smile. She didn't nod. She simply stepped back from the screen, the silence behind her roaring louder than any applause ever could. The room was still reeling from the contrast of the 2 videos. But Jasmine wasn't finished. Truth alone wasn't enough, not when the lie had a name, a sender, and an address. Now it was time to drag that lie into the light, name by name, line by line. Jasmine turned away from the screen, her footsteps deliberate as she returned to the podium. Her eyes didn't scan the room. They locked forward, cutting through silence like a blade through glass. "You've seen what they did," she began, voice steady and unshaking. "Now let's talk about who did it." She reached into her folder and pulled out a single printed page. White paper, black ink, damning truth. She held it up for just a moment, letting the weight of what it represented settle on every shoulder in the room. Then, with precision, she inserted a second USB into the console beside her and tapped the screen. The monitor changed. Gone were the split-screen videos. In their place, an email appeared. Simple, cold, undeniable. Jasmine didn't speak right away. She let the text speak for itself. "Cut the human survival line. Frame the message. Send to media before 7 p.m. The room went deathly still. No one breathed. It was the kind of message designed never to see the light of day. A message meant to stay buried beneath layers of red tape, locked inside the corridors of power, where accountability rarely followed. And now it was 10 feet tall on a government screen. Jasmine stepped aside and gestured toward it. This isn't a rumor. This isn't a theory. This is a direct order, one meant to rewrite reality before the truth had a chance to speak. Her voice stayed level, but the fire underneath it was unmistakable. Someone didn't just want to discredit Representative Ocasio-Cortez. They wanted to erase her, to make sure her words never stood a chance against the lie they already had waiting. She clicked again. This time the metadata appeared. Who sent it, from where, and when. The name was there in bold, Daniel Kessler. Jasmine read it aloud slowly, deliberately. Daniel Kessler, senior media advisor to Senator Bradley Connors of Texas. She didn't need to say more. The connection was enough to send murmurs crawling through the room like fire under floorboards. Everyone in that chamber knew Connors, knew his record, his rhetoric, his disdain for voices like AOC's. But what they didn't know until now was how far his office was willing to go to destroy those voices. A few people shifted in their seats. Aides staff whispered behind palms. One reporter silently lifted his phone to begin recording what he knew would be the headline of the week. But Jasmine wasn't finished, not by a long shot. She stepped forward again, eyes scanning the panel of lawmakers in front of her. This wasn't a media mistake. This was an intentional act of political fraud carried out from within this building, a deliberate manipulation of a congressional record by someone paid by the people to deceive the people. Her voice grew sharper with every word, not louder, just harder, each syllable landing like a gavel. They didn't twist her words because they misunderstood them. They twisted her words because the real ones were too powerful, too honest, too dangerous to the system they were trying to protect. She turned back toward the screen, let the email linger for one last moment, and then shut it off. Now she was standing in silence. The kind of silence that doesn't happen often in politics. Not awkward, not uncertain, reverent. A silence that meant people weren't just listening, they were absorbing. Jasmine stepped back to the center, her hand now flat on the edge of the podium. Her next words came softer, but with a different kind of weight. Not rage, resolve. You can try to erase a sentence, she said, but you cannot erase the reason it was spoken. You can cut out a line, but not the pain it came from or the truth it revealed. She paused just for a breath and then said it, the line that would be quoted, posted, replayed, and remembered long after the room emptied. The media once burned books. Today it burns truth. But this fire, she looked directly into the nearest camera. I'm putting out with justice. No applause followed, no cheer, just stillness. Like the air had thickened, like the building itself was holding its breath. She didn't wait for approval. She didn't need it. The chamber had fallen silent after Jasmine's final words. But beyond those marble walls, something even louder had begun to stir. Truth had been buried, yes. But now voices long dismissed were rising from the edges, carrying something even more dangerous than outrage. Receipts. At first it was just a few tweets, a couple of threads from independent journalists, those without TV contracts, without corporate filters, without obligations to anyone but their audiences. They had watched Jasmine's testimony, replayed the split-screen footage, and read the email aloud on live streams. And unlike the networks that once turned a blind eye, these journalists didn't hesitate. This isn't just a media mistake, one wrote. This is a systemic, coordinated operation to destroy a woman's credibility for political gain. The thread exploded, shared by students, organizers, former staffers, and eventually even by one or two reluctant blue-check reporters who had stayed silent for far too long. Then came the video breakdowns, frame by frame, audio wave by audio wave, proving beyond doubt that the edit was intentional. The real story was no longer hidden, it was viral. And this time, the people weren't waiting for permission to be angry. As the tide swelled online, something even more explosive happened. Former insiders began to talk. Not anonymous sources, not whispers in backrooms. Real names, real faces. A woman named Carla Vega, who once worked as a segment editor for a national cable news outlet, posted a 6-minute video that set the internet on fire. In it, she described what she called the speech furnace, a hidden room where hours of congressional footage were chopped into 20-second sound bites, all designed to fit pre-written headlines. "There's a list," she said, eyes dead serious. "Every week we're given a list of targets. Some from Congress, some from lobbying firms. We're told which quotes to emphasize, which faces to freeze on, and which narratives to reinforce, whether or not they're true." She looked straight into the camera. "We didn't just take things out of context, we removed the context on purpose." Her confession shattered the illusion of objectivity. Within hours, other former producers, editors, and assistants began posting in solidarity. Some showed old email threads. Others leaked internal style guides with phrases like emotional priming, frame alignment, and turn moment into movement. A former news graphic designer shared before and after screenshots of thumbnail packages. AOC's real face replaced by one with sharpened angles and darker shadows, designed to spark discomfort before a word was even spoken. "We were trained to make her look aggressive," he admitted, even when she wasn't. The revelations poured in like a flood breaching a dam. Independent outlets ran full exposés titled "The Broadcast Blacklist," detailing how certain public officials, mostly women of color, mostly progressive, were flagged by internal watch lists for aggressive media handling. One former executive even admitted in a late-night interview that AOC had been on that list since her first week in office. "She scared the donors," he said bluntly. "That was enough." The statement sent shockwaves through political journalism circles. For years, those who questioned these patterns had been labeled conspiratorial. Now the conspiracy was printing itself in real time. And yet the most chilling moment came not from a journalist or a whistleblower, but from an email. An old leaked internal memo, dated months before the scandal. It had been circulated among senior producers at a major network. The subject line read, "Managing Narrative Risk, Cortez." Inside, it listed strategies for minimizing her reach. Limit full-length coverage. Avoid unedited clips. Emphasize controversial sound bites. Avoid facial close-ups when she's composed. Opt instead for reaction shots during intense moments. It was surgical, clinical, planned, and it confirmed what many feared. The machine hadn't failed. It had worked exactly as designed. As the public realized the scope of what had been done, not just to AOC, but to their own understanding of truth, outrage turned to reckoning. Hashtags were replaced with subpoenas. Calls for hearings were replaced with investigations. Networks began scrambling, issuing half-hearted statements, insisting on editorial independence and isolated incidents. But the damage was done. The curtain had been pulled back. And what stood behind it wasn't journalism. It was performance, profit, power. But perhaps the most powerful moment came when an elderly man, Miguel Santiago, a retired editor from a local Spanish-language station, called into a live stream with tears in his eyes. "We spent decades fighting for a free press," he said. "We marched. We published stories they tried to bury. We risked everything. And now I watch these people sit in air-conditioned studios and erase truth because it doesn't fit the poll numbers." His voice cracked. "I didn't survive dictatorship just to watch democracy rot from inside its own newsroom." That moment hit differently because it wasn't political, it was personal. It reminded people that truth is not an opinion, it is a right, and it must be defended, especially when it's inconvenient, especially when it's under attack. In the end, Jasmine hadn't needed to speak again. The country was speaking for her. AOC, once isolated, now had an army of journalists, of former insiders, of citizens who had been lied to one time too many. The truth had burned quietly in the dark, but now at last it was roaring back, uninvited, undeniable, and impossible to edit out. The country had watched the truth rise from beneath layers of lies, but the voice at the center of it all had remained quiet, absent, almost ghost-like. Now finally, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was ready to speak, not to defend herself, but to confront the silence that had nearly swallowed her whole. The CNN studio lights cast a hard glow across the polished stage. The countdown clock above the camera ticked down from 10. The red light flared on, and the nation leaned forward. 5.2 million people, waiting for the woman they had either condemned or defended, often without ever hearing her voice in full. Alexandria sat alone at the desk. No panel, no counterpoint. Just her. A single microphone and the deafening expectation of a country divided by her silence. Her hands rested calmly on the table, but her eyes held something deeper, something harder than defiance, quieter than rage. It was resolve built not in victory, but in survival. She didn't look at the camera when she spoke. She looked just off it, as though speaking not to a lens, but to someone who had once believed in her, and then walked away. "I know what you've been told," she began. "I've heard the headlines. I've read the comments. I've seen the edits. The ones that turn my voice into a weapon against me." She took a breath, but her voice never wavered. "And I'm not here to take anything back, because I'm not afraid of what I said." Her gaze finally locked onto the lens. "I am afraid of something else. I'm afraid of the silence. The silence of people who heard what I really said and still chose to say nothing. The silence of those who knew the truth, but let the lie spread like fire because it was easier." The air in the studio thickened, even through the screen. You could feel the collective weight of the moment, the unspoken guilt of a nation that had watched someone burn while holding a bucket of water and choosing to do nothing. AOC leaned in slightly, her voice lowering but tightening like a cord. "I'm not afraid of being misquoted. That happens to anyone who tells the truth out loud. What I fear is being erased by people who knew I was telling the truth and let me fall anyway." She paused, just long enough to let the words hit where they needed to, just long enough for the viewers on the other end to look at themselves in the mirror. "I survived this not because I had power," she said, "but because someone refused to let me fall alone. Because one voice, just one, stepped into the fire with me. And that voice didn't belong to a billionaire, or a network, or a party. It belonged to a woman named Jasmine Crockett." Silence again. This time, the kind that stings. Then she sat back. No dramatic exit line. No tearful conclusion. Just a quiet exhale as the red light above the camera flicked off and the screen faded to black. Outside the studio, the night air was thick with electricity. Cameras flashed. Reporters murmured behind barriers. But Alexandria didn't pause. She stepped through the glass doors and into the chaos with calm steps. Head held high, as though walking through the ashes of a battlefield she had just emerged from. And there, waiting under the edge of the awning, hands clasped in front of her chest, face unreadable but eyes burning, stood Jasmine Crockett. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. In front of every lens, every click of the shutter, every spectator still trying to turn this into spectacle, they embraced, not like politicians, like survivors. And the world watched, not 5 million, not 10, but a nation that had forgotten what truth looked like until now. And in that moment, for once, no one dared interrupt. The world had seen the truth, unedited and undeniable. But for justice to mean anything, it couldn't just end with applause. The machine that tried to bury a voice had to answer. And this time, silence wouldn't be enough. At exactly 6 p.m. Eastern, networks went dark for 4 seconds, just long enough to make the nation hold its breath. Then, without warning, a white screen faded in, blank, clean, clinical. No music, no graphics, just text in black capital letters. Correction. On May 5th, networks aired an edited video of Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez that misrepresented her statements. The message lingered on screen for 5 seconds before fading into a pre-recorded video of their primetime anchor, shoulders rigid, voice low. "We regret this error and extend our apology to Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez, to our viewers, and to all those impacted by the edited footage." No names were named, no responsibility claimed. The anchor's eyes didn't blink. 45 seconds later, the feed cut to black. Then the regular programming resumed, as if the most explosive scandal in the network's history hadn't just been condensed into the time it takes to boil a cup of coffee. But the apology came too late, and it came too quietly. By the following morning, the media world was already bleeding. Headlines spread faster than the apology ever could. Network X issues, quiet correction after public outrage. Too little, too late, AOC smear fallout deepens. Viewers weren't moved by the apology. They were furious. Activists flooded the network's social media accounts. Former employees added fuel to the fire, sharing more details of manipulated segments, ghost-edited interviews, and narrative directives passed down from executive floors. Sponsors began calling behind closed doors. A half dozen advertisers pulled placements within 24 hours. And somewhere in a boardroom, the final thread holding together the illusion of control finally snapped. The resignation didn't come with a press conference. It came with a memo. A plain PDF sent at 3:17 a.m., buried in the network's internal messaging system. Effective immediately, I am stepping down from my role as CEO of Network X. I take full responsibility for the decisions made under my leadership. I offer no excuses, no signature, no farewell speech. Just a name, Daniel Stratton, the same man who had once bragged in a trade interview that narrative control is the final frontier of modern journalism. Now he was gone, quietly erased from the network's website by sunrise. No tribute, no legacy montage, just a black hole where authority used to sit. But the reckoning wasn't done. At 9 a.m. sharp, the U.S. Department of Justice issued a formal statement. A federal inquiry has been launched into allegations of deliberate media manipulation by Network X, its executives, and associated political operatives. The statement was brief, but the implications were seismic. The language was direct. Coordinated distortion of congressional proceedings, politically motivated editing, intent to mislead the American public. Subpoenas began flying like shrapnel. Former producers were called in. The office of Senator Bradley Connors was placed under immediate review for its connection to the planted emails. Whistleblowers were granted protection, and the investigation's scope widened, fast. The country watched it all unfold in real time. Morning shows that once ignored the scandal now covered it in full. Headlines turned to sirens. Media collapse at Network X. From edit to indictment, the AOC files. Citizens who had once taken what they saw on screen as gospel now questioned everything. Viewers weren't just angry, they were betrayed. And betrayal, when fed truth, becomes something far more dangerous than outrage. Memory. Meanwhile, the network scrambled to stop the bleeding. Emergency meetings were held. Lawyers were hired. Spin was deployed. But nothing could bury what had already surfaced. Not when it was etched into the nation's consciousness. Not when 5.2 million people had watched Jasmine Crockett stand before the world and show them, frame by frame, how a democracy nearly choked on a lie. And now the people were choking back. The flames of scandal had cooled, but the scars remained etched across the nation's conscience. And now, 1 year later, inside a packed auditorium lit by the echoes of truth, Jasmine Crockett stepped back into the spotlight, not to reopen old wounds, but to make sure no one forgot who tried to silence whom. The Truth in Politics conference wasn't a typical event. There were no red carpets, no cocktail receptions, no hollow applause for empty slogans. It wasn't about brands. It wasn't about legacy. It was about survival, of facts, of integrity, of democracy itself. Held inside the marble rotunda of the National Press Forum in Washington, D.C., the event had drawn journalists, whistleblowers, policymakers, and citizens from across the country. The seats were filled, the aisles were full, the air buzzed with anticipation as if history had walked into the room and decided to sit in the front row. And at its center, standing behind a simple black lectern with no teleprompter, was Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. She didn't read from notes. She didn't posture. She stood with her hands flat on the podium, looked into the eyes of every person watching, and spoke in the same voice that had once shattered the illusion of safety in a congressional hearing room. "I spent most of my life learning how to argue in a courtroom," she began, her voice steady but resonant. "I was trained to defend people, to defend facts. But that day, on the floor of the House with the truth buried beneath edits, with silence hanging over justice like fog, I wasn't arguing a case." She paused, eyes narrowing. "I was arguing for the soul of a country that was being led by a lie." The room went still. Not quiet, still. Like the breath of the entire crowd had synchronized to match hers. She continued. "It wasn't about winning. It wasn't about party lines or polling numbers. It was about whether the truth still mattered when no one wanted to hear it. Her voice tightened, her fingers curling around the edge of the podium. They didn't just try to break Alexandria, they tried to write her out of her own story. And the scariest part? It almost worked. A ripple moved through the audience, but Jasmine didn't pause. They came for her words. They cut them, rearranged them, packaged them like poison, and handed them to the public with a smile. And for days, no one questioned it. Not the networks, not the party, not even some of the people who had once marched beside her. Her voice cracked, just slightly, because it's easier to believe the lie you've already swallowed than to admit you were part of it. Cameras clicked softly in the background, but no one interrupted. She let the silence hold. Then, she stepped back from the microphone and tapped the screen behind her. It lit up. A simple tweet displayed in massive white letters on a black background. Jasmine gave me her voice when mine was crushed, and in doing so, she gave me back my political life. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Gasps whispered across the auditorium. Not because the words were shocking, but because they carried the weight of what had nearly been lost. Jasmine stared at the screen for a moment, then looked back at the audience. I didn't do it for politics, she said. I did it because one day it's going to be someone else. And if we let this happen once, if we normalize the erasure of voices that challenge power, then we've already lost more than one congresswoman. We've lost the meaning of democracy itself. She closed her eyes for half a second, as if holding the final words inside her chest before releasing them. Truth doesn't need permission to exist, she said, but it does need people brave enough to stand beside it, when it's inconvenient, when it's ugly, and especially when it's almost gone. And in that moment, beneath the lights, among the press, inside a building that once let silence win, Jasmine Crockett made sure the truth wasn't just remembered, it was restored. As the crowd dispersed and the stage lights cooled to a fading glow, Jasmine Crockett stepped down from the podium, not into victory, but into something far more dangerous and sacred, a moment of clarity. And in that quiet, the lesson revealed itself, not as a headline or applause line, but as something carved out of pain, betrayal, and defiance. The lesson wasn't immediate. It didn't arrive wrapped in sound bites or stitched into speeches. It came later, on the long drive home, in the silence of living rooms across the country, in the stillness after the story had been told. Because what happened to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez wasn't just a political ambush. It was a human collapse, a test not of policy, but of character, a case study in how quickly the world will look away when someone speaks the truth too loudly, too clearly, and without permission. And what Jasmine did in that moment, standing between the lie and the world, was more than defense. It was resistance in its most intimate form. She wasn't just saving a friend. She was confronting a sickness, the kind of sickness that doesn't announce itself with violence, but with a shrug. The kind that spreads not because of outrage, but because of indifference. In those days after the edited video aired, what Alexandria faced wasn't just slander, it was abandonment. Powerful allies, progressive voices, networks that once raced to book her suddenly fell silent. Editorial boards chose neutrality. Campaign donors ghosted. Even some colleagues she'd stood beside in protest lines began issuing carefully worded statements as if decency had to be run through a focus group before it could become real. That was the real wound. Not the lie, but the silence that let it breathe. And so, when Jasmine stood up, not with a press release, but with the full footage, the receipts, the timeline, and the courage to call names, she did something that shocked the system more than the scandal ever did. She refused to play along. She didn't wait for permission. She didn't test the political winds. She didn't do what was easy. She did what was right. That is the lesson. That has to be the lesson. Because the truth is, most people don't lose their voice when it's stolen. They lose it when no one offers to carry it. They lose it when lies are easier to digest than uncomfortable truths. They lose it when justice is scheduled for after the news cycle ends. And what happened to AOC happens everywhere. It happens to women in boardrooms who speak up once and are labeled difficult forever. It happens to teachers who point out injustice in the curriculum and are told to focus on the basics. It happens to young organizers in small towns who are shouted down with, "Don't make this political." It happens to whistleblowers who are told their loyalty matters more than their integrity. It happens to truth tellers who are asked to smile while they're being erased. That's why Jasmine's act mattered. Because in a world engineered to discourage confrontation, she didn't hesitate to confront. In a system designed to reward silence, she chose noise. In a profession bloated with performance, she chose principle. And not because it was fashionable, but because it was necessary. She reminded us that integrity isn't an instinct, it's a decision, and it's never a convenient one. The lesson is this: justice isn't always a thunderclap. Sometimes it's a whisper in a hallway, a single voice saying, "No, that's not what she said." A pair of eyes watching the screen and refusing to unsee what's been done. A hand reaching into the fire not to pull someone out, but to stand there beside them until the flames back off. Because that's what Jasmine did. She didn't rescue Alexandria. She refused to let her be left alone. And in doing so, she reminded a country of what it means to stand for someone when no one else will. But the lesson is also darker, sharper, because for this act of truth, Jasmine faced backlash. She was accused of grandstanding, called a radical, asked by consultants, was it worth it? And yet she never flinched, because when the machine comes for one of us, it's already coming for all of us. And unless someone interrupts that machinery, unless someone jams the gears with their body, their voice, their name, we all become complicit. That's what Jasmine taught us. That courage isn't measured by volume, it's measured by proximity to consequence. And she stepped directly into it. That's the most human part of all, because it would have been easier to stay quiet, to let AOC take the hit and rebuild her reputation slowly in carefully crafted interviews and image rehab campaigns. Jasmine could have protected herself, protected her seat, protected her standing. But she didn't. She chose the fire. She chose the weight. She chose to carry the part of truth that was too heavy for one person to lift alone. And what happened next? The hearings, the exposure, the apology, the resignation, the federal investigation. None of it would have happened without her refusal to look away. So what does it all mean? What's the real takeaway? It means that power doesn't fear anger. It fears clarity. It fears people who speak with nothing to lose. It fears truth wrapped in discipline. It fears those who refuse to be baited into rage, but also refuse to be silenced into civility. And the lesson, the hard and beautiful lesson that Jasmine Crockett etched into the country's conscience is this: if you don't fight for someone when they have been distorted, erased, and left alone, you don't just lose them, you lose yourself. Because someday it will be your voice. Someday it will be your words, twisted out of context, your truth reduced to a headline, your silence mistaken for guilt, your allies suddenly out of office, offline, or out of reach. And in that moment, you won't need a movement. You'll need a person, someone to stand and say, "That's not what she said, and I won't let you lie about it." That's what Jasmine was. That's what we all need to become. Because in the end, justice isn't a destination. It's a chain. And every time we speak out, every time we refuse to forget, every time we lend our voice to someone who's lost theirs, we add another link. And maybe, just maybe, we make it strong enough to hold. The applause had ended, the lights dimmed, and the crowd dissolved into history. But the truth had not. It remained not as closure, but as a summons. And now as the story reaches its final breath, the spotlight no longer rests on Jasmine or AOC. It turns to us. So what now? Now that you've seen how easily truth can be butchered, now that you've watched a voice get dragged through the furnace of distortion and come out blistered, now that you've witnessed the kind of silence that screams louder than bullets, what happens next isn't on a politician's shoulders. It's on yours. Because the truth survived this time, but barely. It was almost lost beneath a sea of headlines that cared more about rage than reality. It almost drowned in a flood of clicks, edits, algorithms, and willful ignorance. And the people who orchestrated the takedown, they're still out there. They haven't been fired. They haven't vanished. They're waiting, plotting the next erasure, perfecting it. Next time, they'll do it cleaner, smarter, faster. And unless we stop pretending that truth is self-correcting, next time, they'll win. That's what this moment demands you to understand. Truth does not float on its own. It sinks unless you hold it up. And when it sinks, it doesn't just take one voice with it. It takes hope. It takes justice. It takes the last fragile pieces of trust we have in each other and pulverizes them until we stop believing anything matters. That's not drama. That's history. So what can you do? Start with this. Stop being a spectator. Because injustice feeds on spectators. It thrives when good people assume that someone else, someone louder, richer, more connected, will step in. It feeds when we tell ourselves it's not our fight, or too complicated, or probably not as bad as it looks. That's how it survives. So break the cycle. Be the one who watches closer. Be the one who pauses when others scroll. Be the one who asks, why was this edited? Who benefits from this angle? What got cut out before this clip went viral? Be the one who rewinds the tape and presses play again, this time with your eyes wide open. Because lies don't hide in shadows anymore. They hide in plain sight, in headlines that sound too neat, in sound bites timed to go viral at exactly 7:01 p.m., in posts that seem tailor-made to trigger you, not inform you. And when you share without checking, when you rage without reading, when you believe without demanding proof, you're not just being fooled, you're being used. Don't be useful to your own deception. Start small. Demand full footage, not fragments. Support local reporters who still believe facts matter more than framing. Cancel your loyalty to outlets that lie, then apologize in tiny footnotes 3 days later. When a friend posts something that feels off, don't ignore it. Ask questions. Push back. Say, where did this come from? Say, show me the rest. Say, prove it. Because every time you do, you weaken the machine that almost erased AOC, the machine that will try again, the machine that sees the truth as an obstacle, not a compass. And if you think you're too small to matter, remember this, so was the lie. It started small. Just one sentence stripped of context, just one clip, just one email with the subject line, cut it before it spreads. But it nearly brought down one of the loudest, clearest voices of our time. So imagine what your one pushback could stop. This is the moment you decide what kind of citizen you want to be, not what party you support, not what issues you post about, what kind of person you are when the truth is under attack. Are you the one who turns away, or the one who turns around and walks straight into the fire? Because Jasmine didn't have a viral campaign ready. She didn't know the ending. She didn't even know if the truth would survive. But she still stood up. She still pressed play on the uncut video. She still read the name behind the doctored file out loud. And in doing so, she showed the rest of us how to fight. So don't thank her with applause. Join her. When the next voice is silenced, speak louder. When the next injustice is buried, dig harder. When someone tells you it's not worth it, look them in the eye and say, it has to be. Because if we don't do this now, we may not get the chance to later. This isn't about saving politicians. It's about saving a world where the truth still has a pulse, where facts can breathe, where justice can stand without being mocked, edited, or erased. So organize, mobilize, memorize what happened here, and carry it forward. Carry it into the classroom. Teach students that asking questions is not disrespectful. It's survival. Carry it into newsrooms. Demand that accuracy never be sacrificed for engagement. Carry it into churches, into city halls, into coffee shops and group chats, and anywhere lies slip in dressed as outrage. Make it personal. Because this story may have started in Congress, but it ends where you are sitting now. If you've ever been lied about, if you've ever told the truth and been punished for it, if you've ever been afraid to speak because of what might happen after, you already know what's at stake. And if you haven't yet, wait, because someday it will be your words they twist, your silence they expect, your voice they erase. And in that moment, you will look around, and you will either find a world full of people who remember Jasmine's fight, or a world that forgot it. You get to choose which one we become. But make no mistake, this is not just a story about justice. It's a blueprint. It's a test. It's a line drawn in the sand between those who believe in surface and those who believe in substance. And the next time the fire comes, the next time the system decides someone's voice is too dangerous, too raw, too inconvenient to keep alive, the next time the edits start and the footage disappears and the whispers grow loud, you will be the one holding the match. Will you light another lie? Or will you burn down the silence? The choice is yours. It always was. And maybe that's the question that matters most. Not what we do today, but how we'll be remembered tomorrow. Because long after the scandal fades and the headlines disappear, someone will ask what we did when truth was on the brink, when voices like AOC's were being shredded into sound bites and fed to an audience hungry for outrage. They won't care about our intentions. They'll ask, did we stand by and let it happen? Or did we fight for what was real? This story was never just about politics. It was about what happens when a lie is engineered, when silence becomes weaponized, when good people scroll past injustice because it feels too heavy to carry. And that weight, it belongs to all of us now. If you're looking for a place to begin, start with this. Stop being passive. Question what you see. Demand full footage, not fragments. Share what's real, not what's viral. Challenge the headlines. Push back against the machine that almost erased her. One voice can shift the current, and yours might be the one that turns the tide. Because Jasmine Crockett didn't save the truth by being perfect. She saved it by being present. She didn't wait for permission. She didn't ask for applause. She stood up because no one else would. And in doing so, she gave us more than justice. She gave us a map. Now follow it. In your schools, in your news feeds, in your dinner tables and town halls. Make truth your reflex. Make courage your habit. And when you see another voice being targeted, edited, isolated, don't wait. Move, speak, be the firewall. The next voice they come for might not have a Jasmine watching. It might be yours. And when it is, when the narrative turns and the crowd goes silent, may you remember what she did. May you remember that one person armed with facts and fire can stop a lie dead in its tracks. Let that person be you. Let it start now. Let it never stop. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.